I'm Denise Imbo with Gord Addison, and we're doing a little bit of our election wrap-up. So welcome, Gord.
Hi, thanks. Great to be here.
Now, Gord is a council watchdog, I think, as well. You go to most of the council meetings. Is that true?
Yeah, particularly over the last 5 years, I had this rather strange little niche business going where developers would actually pay me to go to council meetings and take notes.
One of the few people who are paid to be there. Otherwise, who would want to be there, right?
Yes. Yeah, interesting, but, not there's probably better options than Squamish on a Tuesday night for some people, but always fascinating. It's been an interesting through the last 3 years.
It is fascinating. Now, you have a unique perspective as well, after having sat through all the council meetings of sort of watching, and you know probably more than most people do about what's going on and the issues of the day, and so you speak knowledgeably, which is why we've asked you on today. So because we're hoping that you can give us a bit of a wrap up. But you also have an interest in politics other than that as well. Do you have a background in politics?
Yeah, I've got involved in politics almost from high school. I've worked on Parliament Hill in Ottawa. I worked in Victoria years ago, and right now I work for an opinion polling company. So it's politics, it's numbers, yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about the election. How do we feel about it? What does it tell us? Give me a few thoughts on the campaign or the election now that it's over. What do you think?
It was an interesting campaign because on the surface, not a whole lot of, the issues are always there, economic development, transit there, but with Rob, incumbents and then this challenge from Owley, who has only been in town for 2 years, who came very close. So what were the issues? What were driving people? Fascinating. And then you had not the people who stepped up and for the council positions. Not a lot of them were well known. So what was able to differentiate the people who made it to the people who didn't make it? That was interesting. It was going to be an interesting night. Someone came up with 100,000 possible permutations on council, which is correct. Yeah. So were
you surprised with the results?
I guess it's one of those things that when you look at it in hindsight, it's not perfectly obvious. What really stood out was that what gets you elected is long-term community involvement. If you look at Ron Sander, Ted Pryor, maybe on issues, policies, not a whole lot in common, but the thing they absolutely do have in common is they've both been around for a long time. They've both been involved in committees and kids sports and various things, and that gets you the name recognition. That gets you, people know you, and people say yes or no. Gets you on people's short list. And if you're not well known, it's very, very tough to get there.
I heard somebody say recently, and so let's just leave the mayoral race out for a minute, but let's just look at the council race, because I heard somebody say recently, if there had been no campaign, the results would have been about the same had we done this 6 weeks earlier. So let's speak about the campaign. What do you think the value is of that? And do you think it made a difference at all for anybody?
I'd say, at the end of the day, no. I think the people who did an exceptional job, if you look at the numbers and that, being an incumbent was worth 1,200 votes. All the incumbents got on average 1,200 votes more than the non-incumbents. But there were 3 positions open on council. And at the end of the day, if you look at the guys who were closest, Jeff Cook and Peter Kent probably ran very good campaigns. I looked at signage and, who got their presence out in signage the most. And pretty good correlation with, the more signs meant the more likely to get elected. And Jeff and Peter actually, with the signs, with Peter, were able to get themselves close with that kind of building up their name recognition and that. One of the things that's been known in politics for years, and we saw it here too, signs with pictures help. People, if they don't know your name, they might recognize your face and that. And guys like Ron Sander, there's 8 candidates that had signs with pictures, and 4 of those got elected.
Interesting. That is interesting. So now, what else about the campaigning? What worked? What didn't work?
I think Owley's campaign, even though she came close, given she was in the community for so long, I think you have to say that she did a great job of campaigning. I look through Squamish politics, through the last years. I always see it as a trade-off between people who have, and people who have a lot of vision, but not so much financial common sense, and people with financial common sense and not so much vision. And I think that was pretty well crystallized in this race here, where you have a Rob, bank manager, very fiscally prudent, Owley with a lot of vision, but what's it going to cost to have a bus stop somewhere every 15 minutes, if that's the thing. The marketing, great marketing on Owley's part to get herself so close. Without that, in depth, compared to Rob's background and knowledge in the community, did great compared to where she started.
She did. Actually, no, and we are going to, okay, so we've jumped into the mayoral, so let's just talk about that, because you're right, they're quite different. One female, one male, one visionary, one financial, one person who had 20 years in the community, one person who had 2. Yeah. So they were completely different on every marker, but their votes were very similar. So what do you think that says?
I think that people at the end of the day decided they're going to go with the safe choice with Rob, but there's obviously, it's not a huge victory for Rob in that a lot of people looked at him and said, not so sure. There's obviously a bit of registry of discontentment. And, you look back at the council. The last council was interesting. It did... I think the real successes of the last council were things that were not sexy, that were not, getting, the Service Squamish initiative together, sorting out City Hall, things like, a plan for infrastructure. I mean, we get a plan for the infrastructure now, but people just want their water to turn on. It's not sexy. Doesn't grab people. And the real problems we do have, the things that Ali was able to pick up on, economic development, transit, difficult issues. I've sat there, I've watched councillors who they want to do economic development, they want to do transit, but it's expensive and difficult, and now's not the time where things come easy.
With the social media, do you think you must get in and sort of get in the scrum, or is it enough just to listen and hear what people are saying and react?
Squamish Speaks is a bit of a difficult bird in a way, because Ali did start it, and for a while there Ali was an administrator, which I think that's one of the things that probably drew people back from her, because you didn't quite to me being involved in politics for a long time, it's not obvious you don't be the administrator of something that's openly discussing your election. And she eventually did step away, and that, but perhaps potentially the damage had been done. But at the end of the day, to not so if I think it'd be strange for Rob or Doug to maybe jump on something that an opponent is orchestrating.
So do you think that's why they didn't jump in? Because I know that I would hear them make comments, so I know that they knew what was on there. But I mean, they didn't jump in. They weren't, and it seemed to me on that particular site that there was, if you weren't saying what they wanted you to say, there was definite, struggle. So if it was a neutral site, then say if it's a site that didn't have any connection to anybody, do you think that the councillors need to get on there and engage, or do you think it's enough that they listen to what the people are saying?
I think listening is important, but it doesn't get you any points at the end of the day unless you prove you've listened. And that, I definitely, guys like Ron Sander, Mike Jensen did get on there. They said things, and they did get jumped on, by people who were unhappy with their positions on things. So I think maintaining the neutrality, if that site's going to continue to be successful, maintaining its neutrality in perception. People are going to say they weren't biased, but you have to be perceived as unbiased to be successful, and that. So I think it's a challenge going forward. Are Rob and Doug the kind of guys who would jump in? And it's a whole different story being a councillor. When you actually you're actually speaking for the district. A guy like Brian Reiser learned that it was a big difference between being a columnist and being a councillor. You can say certain things as a columnist in the paper or as an outside critic, but when you're on council, you have to stand by their decisions. You can't, it has to be a team moving forward. So you have to be. Do they want to play their debates on council out in Squamish Speaks? Is that the way it should happen? There's a value. There's people listening. You get it on the record. I think it's probably more of a sounding board, a mini focus group on. You can toss out trial balloons on there and say what do we need to do about this? Any ideas out there on transit or recreation or trails or stuff like that? And those ideas can be filtered in. But I think as a councillor, they're going to have to be very careful. Patty Heinzman is interesting to watch on there because she's the person who can get the information right away. And she knows the background of the decisions and that. And I think she was much more in a role there of providing information for people and perhaps explaining decisions as opposed to kind of pushing her point of view, which, as a councillor or someone there in that. So then you push that into, the thing that politicians always get jammed into is that they just end up defending their view and not being consultation. They they have to make decisions at the end of the day, and then they have to defend those decisions. And whether it's 100% or 90%, 55% decision is hard to Codify, yeah.
I actually think Patty did a good job. She was one of the few people who, when I read her things, it was a neutral voice, and you could feel the characters coming through there. You see how the people, what they felt strongly about, or you'd see how they would react. And Patty did manage to sort of stay neutral on there, just provide information, and keep the issues moving forward without getting too tied to or too defensive. Which I think to get into it, you have to be able to do that. But it's even difficult, I think, to watch when you're hearing people criticizing you, and they don't have all the information. I think that would be a difficult thing to do, but important, right?
Yeah, I think there were a couple of issues that did come up. The Doug Day letter and the BC Rail decision on the Mamquam Channel. And again, easy to armchair critic, difficult to when you know all the facts. I mean, people were criticizing those decisions, but those were decisions that were 6-1 decisions on council. So people, when you look at all the information that council had, did they make the right decision? Well, 6-1 is a pretty strong decision in one direction in that, and that. So if people are pointing those decisions as what's wrong with our council, it's tough to when people have all the information, even people as different, say as Brian Reiser and Paul Lawley, they're making the same decision. Why is that? And if you have all the information, then things don't seem obvious, but they seem obvious in a different way.
Okay, so one last question about the people who were elected to council, the whole council. And you say it was name recognition, having been here. And so do you think it's as simple as that? Or do you think it had something to do with their positions or where what they said they were going to do for our community? Do you think it's just as simple as people know them and feel like they trust them? Or do you like maybe there's no point in even having a platform if it doesn't make a difference?
I think with a lot of issues, Ali probably stood out in this race where she actually had some quantifiably different positions than Rob in that, and the mayor's race was a little different and interesting that way. But even guys like Ron Sander, guys like Ted Pryor had very different visions of the oceanfront. Still got elected. I think it's still going to be that long-term involvement in the community. People know you, know your name, know your face, have an idea what you'll do, and will make the right decisions for Squamish. Or at least we'll make a proper, considered decision. You might not always agree with, every decision you're going to make, but that gains the trust that people will put in you.
Are you looking forward to the next 3 years?
I think it'll be a very interesting, very dynamic council. I think you don't have any particular group controlling on any particular issue. I think it's a great council for trails and outdoor recreation because you've got Ted Pryor, Brian Reiser, Patty Heintzman, and Susan Chappelle who are tied in with those groups very closely. But Patty and Susan, I think, will be much more oriented towards fiscal responsibility as well. Patty's proven that over the years and I think Susan Chappelle, background business, chamber of commerce, realizes that it's great to have ideas, but the money is paying for them is a whole different thing. Guys like Ron Sander and Susan who also have great ideas about economic development and stuff like that. So I think it'll be interesting, and I don't see over time. It'll be interesting to see where the allegiances end up. But I think there's probably a little more dynamic in this council than perhaps other councils have been.
And a new mayor. How do you feel about that? How do you think Rob's going to step up to the plate?
Rob's strong on fiscal management, on sticking to the plan on the ocean. I think the oceanfront, it's $9 million now, and that's a big issue. He's always one of the, and that's probably one of the challenges. He's always one of the quieter guys on council before. And if you look at why he was probably close this time, it's I think he has to make some progress on economic development in the town. Some kind of progress on local job creation, and hold the line fiscally, and create a bit of vision and see where, get a good idea of where the town wants to go and help and take them there.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, thank you very much for talking to us today, and we'll keep following our Squamish politics for the next 3 years. So thank you, Gordon.
Thank you, Denise.
And that would be the end of our election 2011 Vote Squamish editions, but stay here right on My Squamish to watch the rest of our upcoming videos on conversations with My Squamish. Thank you.